what are some examples of situations where you had to defend a solution design that you knew was sound and correct, but the customer had some objections to? Thank you everyone for coming back to the Exponent channel. My name is Mohammed Hussein, and I'm the host of our Solutions Architect interview series. I work as a solutions architect at Dropbox, and here with me today for our mock interview is Greg. He's a solutions engineer at Twilio. Greg, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Greg Getter. I'm a solutions engineer at Twilio Segment. I come from a product management and product marketing management background. I also, on the side, I run a company related to light and sleep called Restful. Lots of experience doing the customer discovery process, which I think is super relevant to the solutions role, whether it's pre-sales or post-sales. So really excited to get into this one today.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump straight into a pretty commonly asked solution architect interview question, more so on the behavioral side of things. But of course, this is going to definitely overlap with some of the other, maybe even technical, essay interview questions. So the question is, what are some examples of situations where you had to defend a solution design that you knew was sound and correct, but the customer had some objections to?
Okay. Would you mind if I take 20 or so seconds to form my thoughts on this question, just so I can give you a more coherent answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. So the way I'd like to approach this question is maybe instead of diving into a specific example and getting into the weeds of what went right and wrong, would be to give more of a framework for how to think about solutions questions, and then give some specific examples about how we had a solution that was different from what the customer expected. Would it be okay to take that approach for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Answer it however you want. Take as much time as you need. Yeah.
Okay, great. So how I'd like to preface this is, first of all, solutions, whether it's pre-sales solutions engineering or post-sales solutions architect, or whatever your company decides to call it, it's a sales process. This is a customer discovery and ultimately education process. So your company will have its own specific methodology for how they want to approach it. But one of the things that we really learned at Twilio that I firmly believe in is that you need to do discovery throughout the process. It's not just something that happens in one call and then you have a solution. And there's also a lot of education that comes throughout the process. So I see three potential areas where you can run into this issue of misalignment with the customer on what the best solution is. So I would break these down into the following. The first would be alignment. The second would be preconceived notion. And then the third would be prioritization. So let me briefly explain those now, and then we can get into those in more detail with some specific examples. So for alignment, really the question here is, are we aligned with the customer on their challenges and goals? And has the stakeholder given us some indication of buy-in? For the preconceived notion question, is the prospect coming to us with a different solution in mind, and we're going up against a solution that is fundamentally different from what they've come to us with? And then the third aspect is prioritization. So is the customer going on a lot of tangents? Is the customer thinking through second and third order exceptions that are a bit of a distraction from getting us to the end state of this deal? So if I can, now I'd like to walk through those three in a bit more depth. Mm-hmm. So alignment would be the first one. And again, alignment is, are we aligned with the customer on their challenges and goals? And do we have buy-in from the stakeholder? So typically the way the sales process is run is discovery is run soon after the account executive gets involved. And then throughout the entire sales process, up until the point where you start talking pricing and specifics of the deal. And then once the deal has closed on the SA side, there might be some rediscovery if something changed between the beginning and end, but hopefully there's a lot of consistency. So oftentimes that first meeting with a solutions person is very in-depth, We dive into a lot of use cases, goals, and challenges. We dive into the specific stack of the systems that they're using or they're planning to use. And first, you need to make sure that the customer is aware of the process and also able to, in a consistent way, that they are able to align with your process instead of kind of forcing their process down your throat, to be honest. Sometimes you get customers that want to run things their own way, and you need to figure out how to meet them in the middle, because you need to do the discovery to be able to teach them about the solution that you're trying to offer while getting the information that you need. So also, while you're discussing this, it can't just be you absorbing this information and not giving any information back to the customer. So, it's fine to take a lot of notes during that first call, but if you can show a whiteboard, we like to use Miro. If we can show a whiteboard with diagramming of things, or even just writing down a list in front of the customer, and then following up with the customer, hey, here's what we discussed today. Here are some ideas for a solution. Here's a whiteboard, so that the customer has an idea. And you want to consistently engage on that. Get back on the call. Does the customer buy into the solution, the preliminary idea that you're trying to show them? So right from the beginning, before you've really shown them the full solution, are they buying in along the way? And I can give an example of this where we ran into a lot of friction with the customer and ultimately lost this deal. So this customer provides tooling for engineers. So it's software that engineers would use to design a certain type of product. And they essentially came to us wanting to run a sales process in their way, which we're okay working with, but we need to kind of meet them in the middle. But ultimately, the challenge that we had with this customer was we would try to do a lot of discovery, but we didn't have a lot of time to do discovery. So the calls would be 30 minutes, 2 or 3 30-minute calls, not really enough to get the information that we needed for such a complex sale. We also had issues where the customer didn't want to bring in all of the relevant stakeholders. They wanted to kind of run this process in their own side of the business because they didn't, there were indications that they didn't trust the other side of the business because they thought the other side of the business would slow things down. And I can definitely understand the motivation behind that. Certain businesses have a lot of intertwined webs that are very hard to get around, and we just want something that will actually get us to where we want to be. But unfortunately for this type of solution, we just really had to interact with a number of stakeholders. So it was really hard to get buy-in from the key stakeholder to let us discuss with the other stakeholders, or even get all of the preliminary information that we needed. So this is a case of not having customer alignment because we couldn't align on the sales process. We couldn't get the information that we need. And ultimately, it was a huge risk to our team because we can't get to the finish line being confident about our own solution, nor did the customer want to, necessarily hear us out on the full solution because it didn't fully align. So I can stop there for a second before I go into the other ones, if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I think you did a really good job there explaining. Just one really quick question. You mentioned stakeholders. Who were some of the stakeholders that you were working with in that customer? Were these mainly technical folk? Were they, operations folks? Like who were you primarily working with?
Yes, more on the operations side. So the people who came to us would have been in more of a biz ops, sales ops type of role, but we're not even the technical side of that. Right. So, they have other people reporting to them that would handle the technical side of actually making all this stuff work. So, we wanted to get in touch with their analytics people. We wanted to get in touch with the people running the databases, the people who code some of the messaging in their app, because this was all relevant to the sale that we were trying to achieve. And ultimately, they wanted to run the process kind of siloed and in a vacuum. Right. So it just didn't really line up with our expectations.
Got it. And is that why you kind of feel like you guys were sort of derailed on staying onto your sales process, was because you weren't getting the correct stakeholders, and you're kind of the more technical person, and you were interacting with the more like operations personnel. Do you feel like that's kind of why you weren't able to kind of put your sales process down, because you're working with the sales team and they just want to implement their own sales process?
Yeah. Just to be clear, you're referring to the customer, the people who are
Right. Yes.
dealing
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, I feel that we definitely needed the context from other stakeholders was number
Yeah.
one, but also they wanted to run the process in a specific way. And this tends to not work super well if their process that they want to run is very different or very rushed compared to our
Mm-hmm.
slow, drawn out process. And it's maybe an unfortunate reality of the SaaS business model where you have kind of a complex piece of software that you're trying to install, but if people want to do things quickly and skip steps, to be frank, it tends to not allow us to do the full customer discovery process and come with a solution that we're very confident in.
Right. Right. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification there. Yeah. Let's go on. Let's go on and continue.
Okay, so we talked about alignment. Are we aligned with the customer? The next two would be preconceived notion and prioritization. So preconceived notion is the customer coming to us with a specific solution in mind. The last example was about a specific process in mind, but they didn't have a specific solution. The next example is, did they come to us with literally a stack diagram traced out of what they want their solution to look like? And they show our system kind of fitting into that in a way that it's not really designed to. So I've come across this a few times. And number one, the customer is often has a pretty good understanding of the general concepts of a lot of tools in the space. So you're always talking to a very technical, knowledgeable person that you can try to win over and get them on your side. But a lot of times they have a lot of preconceived notions about tools because they don't necessarily know the tool to the same level that you, the solutions engineer or architect, know the tool, and they're not going to. So oftentimes when you talk through the customer discovery process, you try to go into their stack diagram that they've presented to you and try to understand what they're actually trying to achieve with the stack diagram, not just saying, can we fit into it? Often when you start talking to them, you can get a sense of whether they're flexible or not on changing the stack diagram. So if they are flexible, this is often a chance where you can start to show them your way of doing things, the way that your system would work ideally. But sometimes their solution is just really far off from what you can provide, what they imagined, and what you can provide are two very different things. Right. So I think that this is, in my experience, at least with the limited number of opportunities that have these kind of preconceived notions, honestly, they're challenging, and they have kind of a lower likelihood of success because the customer comes in from a less flexible starting point. And if they have preconceived notions about your product that are incorrect, that the product's not going to work like that, it's very difficult to get them out of that mold. And what the customer is often going to do is they're going to try to keep shopping around for adjacent solutions that might fit their stack diagram better. So I can give an example. This is a food delivery app. You've probably heard of them. And they had a lot of different tools in place, and they really wanted to come to us to fix their analytics, first of all, to understand how people, engage with the various web apps, mobile apps, different properties, different databases across their systems. And they had a preconceived notion about how our system would fit into their existing stack. And ultimately, it was just the types of data flows weren't really in alignment with what we were able to provide. And we did try to present to them, hey, based on what we understood, we can fix a majority of these problems, but we need to be very open to thinking about connecting these systems in a different way. And they just weren't super comfortable with that. So this was an opportunity where ultimately the customer stopped responding to us. So, if we were able to keep going with this customer, we would try to continue to do discovery, continue to educate, and see if we could meet them in the middle on the stack diagram that they came to us on. But ultimately, we just didn't get the opportunity to continue to engage with this customer.
How would you have handled this a little bit differently to get them to engage a little bit more with you guys and not have them kind of ghost you, which of course is very, very common. I've dealt with that plenty of times. But how would you have handled the situation a little more differently?
To be honest, this was one of the first opportunities that I had as a solutions engineer. So, I hadn't had specific experience in this role before.
Right.
And the number one piece of self feedback that I would have given myself there is set better expectations about what our process is.
Right.
So I think that we might have had maybe a mismatch because this customer came to us expecting a demo, expecting certain things, and we're trying to run this process. And my sense is that they didn't have the patience or didn't have the understanding, because we didn't necessarily set the understanding that this is a bit of a long drawn out process, especially because of the nature of all these systems.
Yeah. Now I'm curious to know about the last part, prioritization.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about alignment, we talked about preconceived notions on the specifics, and now we're going to talk about prioritization. So the question that I threw up here is the customer throwing exceptions because of some kind of second order consideration? So this is the type of opportunity where the customer likes to talk, likes to go on a lot of tangents, to consider every single aspect. And it's good. You need these types of people to think about every single different second order, third order effect that you're going to have by changing things around. It's very important in any company. But sometimes you get people who, like to do this a lot, and have to make sure that you set a very strong agenda and stick to it with them. And then the other problem with this type of customer, the other challenge that you get with this type of customer is that you'll get to a point where you're preliminarily agreeing on solutions, and you're even maybe doing some value engineering to simplify things, because these deals tend to have like a lot of different connections and things that you need to work with. So we're starting to get into that simplification stage, but then they'll come up with some new exception that we hadn't heard of before in the rest of the discovery process.
Yep.
So number one, it's another example of, hey, discovery is never done until the deal's signed and until the SAs actually implement the whole thing. And even after that, there are going to be changes. So it's never done, but also I think what's really important, and what I could have learned from these opportunities, is to be better at setting expectations about the process, making sure we come to the call with an agenda. Don't start coming to calls where the customer is leading with a lot of questions. And it's fine for them to have questions, but we want to make sure we agree on an agenda first, so that we have something productive achieved and that we have some kind of outcome at the end of that call.
Awesome. Agenda setting is always very, very important. That's something that you definitely always want to do. And you mentioned kind of butting heads with the customer there, where, maybe they would kind of take charge and take lead. And even in some of your other examples, it kind of goes back to being on the same page as the customer. But whether it was in, this example of priority or prioritization or any of the others, did you ever find yourself butting heads with any internal stakeholders, whether that was the account executive, a customer success manager, maybe even another solutions architect? Did that happen? I'm sure it did. And how did you kind of handle that? Because that can always definitely lead to a customer not being on the same page as you and whatnot.
Absolutely. So two examples. One is with an account executive, and one is with the post-sales side. So people who are SAs and people who are ultimately responsible for the integration. So with the account executive earlier on in this type of deal, this account executive was pretty new, and I was maybe just a few months into the role. So we were both relatively inexperienced. And even within the first meeting, I should have done more to align with the account executive on what the agenda was, because it felt like the account executive didn't have a strong grasp of the agenda. And then I feel like I got hit with a lot of stuff unexpected. So that was pretty frustrating at first, but I was able to talk to my manager, and she was able to kind of help me dissect the call and help me understand, what I did and didn't do better. And then we were ultimately able to help coach that account executive as well. Now this account executive is doing quite well. So it's a bit of learning and humility for everyone involved, really, because we're all learning. And especially when you're new in this type of role, you want to be very coachable and willing to give feedback. So the account executive is the first person. The other person would have been later on in the sales process, aligning with the post-sales side of things. These are the people who actually have to implement, and what many of the people watching this are probably going to be doing. So it's one thing to propose a solution based on your knowledge of the product, and it's another thing to actually go implement it. And there are a lot of specifics. You have to know the products, the integrations, whatever you're working with very deep to really get to a working solution. So a lot of times the solutions architects are actually a lot more knowledgeable about the specific integrations, the specifics. So what I would have done differently, we had some conflict there, because what the customer was trying to do was actually pretty complex and a bit outside of what we really designed the product to do. So what I would have done differently and am doing more proactively now is to get the post-sales side involved earlier. So run questions by them, use the workbooks that have been given to us by the post-sales team to wrap a framework around it, so they have some preliminary information. Then we can talk about the solution as we propose. Will this actually work? And then we can come back to the customer. And I think that makes the customer less frustrated, or the solutions architect less frustrated with us on the pre-sales side, because we're more aligned with what's actually going to happen with this customer after the deal gets closed. So one of these deals like this did close. It was a long sales cycle that took more than a year, but it did eventually close. So, persistence does pay off sometimes. But I think getting more alignment along the way, focusing on the customer, and then making sure that you're aligned internally are all really important things to do. And that probably would have helped speed up that process.
100%. 100%. Awesome, Greg. Well, I think that's it for me in terms of questions. Yeah. All right. Interview finished. That was really great. Yeah, that was really great. So now kind of the just reflection part of these mock interviews, like what we like to do. I'm just going to ask you, Greg, how do you think that went?
Okay. So I think overall it went well. I think I had time to prepare and to think of some specific examples into a framework. And I think that presenting it in that way is a bit more productive than just going into a story, to be honest. And I think a lot more learnings are able to be gleaned from that. I think organizing it in such a way and tying a specific example is good, especially when you don't feel comfortable talking about like very specifics of a deal. A lot of times you're not really supposed to talk about specifics of a deal with people outside of your company. So, I think you want to talk about the principles, but also reflect them back to specific experiences you had without, naming names.
Yeah.
So I think that that's important. And it also shows better that you're able to take this knowledge and apply it to other companies. You're not so specific into that one company's methodology. I think probably what I could have done better. I think I set up the three categories well, but I probably could have been more concise in my explanations of those situations. And ultimately, we probably could have cut the answer down to about half of the time that it took. So if I were to do it again, if I had more time to prep, for sure, but even just practicing these questions, I would try to practice these on my own and try to have a very concise answer, still being audible ready, but just ready to, explain it so that the key message comes out right away.
Yeah. I agree with you that the framework part really, really helps kind of set the stage instead of you just jumping right into, telling a story. It's sort of like when you get on the first call with a customer, as an SC or an SA, and you just kind of jump in with the solution without doing proper discovery, right? That's just kind of how I see it. It's really interesting because, within this SA role, these sorts of like mock interviews or courses that, Exponent's providing, this is like one of the first ones. So when, at least for me, when I associate frameworks being implemented in interviews, I really think product management. There's a lot of frameworks that are put into answering those sorts of questions, and I really like how you were able to implement that in a essay interview. Just because, like I said, you're kind of able to be like, here's point A, B, and C. You don't get lost in your own words, and you set things up really well. I do agree that maybe in terms of like the answer could have been shortened a little bit, but I think you did a really great job on staying focused, didn't get derailed, just like you mentioned in the interview process or the sales process getting derailed a little bit. You're able to stay on track. But yeah, thank you so much, Greg, for joining us, and hopefully all the viewers get really valuable insights from what you were able to provide in this interview. And with that, I guess we're gonna go ahead and end the video. If you guys like this, make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.